Hey there, ladies and gents, welcome back to the vlog. My name is Drew, and a bit of a different angle today. So trying out some different angles, different recording, different lighting, places and settings and stuff. So feel free to let me know down in the comments if you like this angle better than the angles that we've been using previously. But that's why things look a little bit different, because I'm actually sitting in a slightly different position today. So today, welcome back to the vlog. As I mentioned, we are going to be doing a viewer question today, and our question comes from our good friend Michael T. Michael, who has suggested a number of things for the channel, and I'm very thankful for that. He asked what my opinion was on freelancers and if you should get into freelancing and that sort of thing. And that's a great question, one that comes up in the world of computer science pretty regularly, or software engineering pretty regularly. Because our industry, or the software engineering industry, I say our because I assume that you're watching this and you have some interest in the industry, but in the industry of software engineering, there is a lot of work that's done by contractors and freelancers and all sorts of people that kind of fall into this realm of a non-permanent employee. And we'll get into that in a second, what that means. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit about what a freelancer or a contractor normally does. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to pretend that freelancer and contractor are synonymous terms. I did a little bit of research trying to see if there was a difference. Some people insist that there is, some people insist that there aren't, but the things that one article will say, the other article will say in like a different manner. So there's a lot of overlap, and I think the consensus is kind of, yeah, sometimes there are differences, but sometimes there's not. And so just to keep everything from getting confusing, we're going to pretend that a freelancer and a contractor are basically the same thing. So with that in mind, a freelancer or a contractor typically is somebody who is not a permanent employee of the company that they are contracting for. And they are called in and paid usually an hourly or a daily or maybe even a lump sum for a project to do work or to consult, to offer their skills to that company. In software engineering specifically, a lot of the time you'll have a company that is working on a new project, or let's say we're a web applications company and we want to build an iOS app, but all of our developers are web and web stack developers. So the cost to send those employees back to school or to respec them or to train them in how to become an iOS developer is pretty large. Like it's no small task pivoting from being a web developer to a iOS application developer, an Android application developer, or kind of doing that pivot. And a lot of the time your employees don't want to do that because they've spent a lot of time working in a web stack or a certain area of technology, and they don't really want to pivot out. So rather than having to fight the uphill battle of retraining your employees and convincing them to do that, you can hire a contractor or a set of contractors or a freelancer or a set of freelancers. And usually you'll hire them because they have expertise in the area that you're looking for. So in our example, it's iOS development or whatever it may be. And then you write out a template or a contract that basically says, like, here's what we need done, here are the deliverables, here are the expectations. Sometimes there's even what are called SLA or service level agreements. So if you are contracting somebody and they have to perform at a certain level or they have to meet certain arrangements for their contract to be valid and for you to pay out. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into drawing up a good contract. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm probably not the best one to ask on that. But just know if you are a freelancer or a contractor, you're probably going to get a document at the start of your contract, or it's basically your contract, that will outline everything that you have to do. But we'll talk about that in a second. I'm doing a lot of that this video. We'll talk about that in a second. I'm kind of trying to organize everything mentally here. But getting back to the idea of a contractor. So typically, like I said, you'll work on an engagement, usually a couple months to a year or a couple years. It just depends on the spec of the project. And if you're a contractor or a freelancer, sometimes you get benefits in the company, but most of the time you will not. So the benefits for the company for hiring a contractor is that they don't usually have to pay health insurance. They don't usually have to pay 401k. So a lot of the benefits that they use for their retained employees or their permanent employees, they get to forego with contractors, which makes them save money and incentivizes getting a contractor to do the work or a freelancer to do the work. All on top of the things that we just talked about, like respecing your employees and things like that. So with that in mind, let's say you want to be a freelancer or a contractor, or you're trying to figure out if that's the direction that your career wants to go in. There are some benefits to contracting and freelancing. For one, you do make a fair bit more money. The income potential for freelancers and contractors is usually always higher than W-2 employees or retained employees. But with that, there comes a lot of responsibility. You have to source your own health insurance. Usually you'll have to incorporate your own corporation. So you'll incorporate an LLC or a C Corp. And basically the company will bill that company or your company so that it looks clean on the invoices and things like that. So there's some corporate governance that goes into it. Again, paying your own health insurance, paying a lot of your own expenses that normally your employer would cover. And then finally, one thing that a lot of people don't really think about is the cultural impact of doing freelancing or contracting. Most of the time, I don't want to say most of the time, some of the time in certain companies, if you are a contractor, you are seen as like an outside person. And a lot of the time, with how cutthroat a lot of these tech companies are, it's usually the contractors or the freelancers that get blamed for a lot of the stuff. So even if you know for a fact that an internal team messed something up or something like that, a bad PM or a bad project manager is almost certainly going to try and find a way to put it on the contractor. And like I said, this is just really egregious examples. Like, not all project managers do this, but realize that contractors are usually the first ones to get cut or laid off. They're usually the first ones to come into blame. Like, if you touched something like 3 months ago and it breaks later, then you're still on the chopping block, even if you had little to nothing to do with it. So there's a lot more of a target on your back, because naturally a lot of companies and a lot of teams are going to want to protect their internal employees and the people that they've been working with for years, more so than they would a contractor or a freelancer that's going to be gone in a couple months. So think about that as well. Now, like I said, if you're thinking about moving in that direction, I can see really two examples of great times to pivot into freelancing. And the first one is at the start of your career. So not even the start of your career, let's say you're just getting into programming, or you're trying to figure out, let's say you're in high school or starting college and you're trying to figure out if computer science is for you. What I would recommend is that you find a family friend or a relative or a buddy or somebody that you know and has a good rapport with you, and see if they have any projects. And I mean like really, really small stuff. So let's say your aunt is starting a dog grooming business and she needs a website, or your neighbor is needing something to help her schedule something else, or like a piece of software or a website or an app or something, real small stuff that you can knock out just yourself in maybe a couple weeks to a year. And what you should do in that case is you should approach that person and say, hey, you want to set the expectations correctly, because you aren't a professional programmer yet. You're kind of figuring this all out yet. So this is your first foray into actually being paid for something that you've been doing for a hobby for now. So you want to set those expectations and say, hey, I'm new to this. Like, I'm trying to figure out if computer science is for me. I noticed that you have this need, or you need to build a website, or you need to build an app or something like that. If you give me a shot, I will build this app for you. I expect it to cost X, Y, and Z, and do the math inside of your head, figure out how long it's going to take you and reasonably all that stuff. And then give them a quote, and don't give them a massive quote. Like, expect like minimum wage. Like, if it's going to take you 20 work hours to finish this app, and that's really quick, I should mention, it's probably going to be higher. Then take 20 hours and then bill that at the minimum wage of whatever the minimum wage is in your area. And then quote that to them. And then realize that they're probably going to say they're going to want to wiggle a little bit, because it will seem like a lot of money for something that they could potentially just do themselves on Wix or something else. But again, this is all in the name of selling yourself and getting you used to the idea of approaching companies later down the road if you choose to go the contracting route later in your career. So that in mind, go and do these little projects, work for little to no money. I'm talking like minimum wage, maybe a couple bucks more than that, but don't expect much. And get used to the idea of working with a client. So talk to them, gather requirements, figure out what it is they need, do check-ins every 2 weeks or so, because that's good practice, especially if you're wanting to do like agile methods or anything later down the road, which everybody should be using agile in one form or another, in my opinion. But work on a 2-week schedule and just check in with them, do the client solicitation, get more requirements and go back and forth. And then, yeah, so this will get you used to working with a client. This will get you used to writing a billing or writing an invoice for the work that you do. It gives you an idea of how to evaluate your work. So that kind of goes with this point as well. And then you may also run into, okay, I really like this feature. Let's expand on that a little bit more. Well, that's going to take you above 20 hours or what you originally built. How do you approach your client and say, hey, if you want that, I'm going to need a little bit more resource wise and that sort of thing. So a little bit of conflict resolution there. And 9 times out of 10, you're going to get to the end of the project and it's probably going to be a little bit shaky. Like the code that you write is probably not going to be production ready, but at least it's just a small little thing. And if it goes south, and it very well could, because again, there's a big step between being a hobbyist programmer and a professional programmer. And so if it goes south, or your client just kind of, you don't work well together or anything like that, it's no big deal, because again, it's just a family friend. You're trying this thing out, and you may have to return some of the money if you completely drop the contract together, but at least this gets you into the mood of working on contracts, and it lets you feel out if you are ready to do this as a professional job. And being a professional programmer involves all of those things, like I said, client solicitation and all that other stuff. So believe it or not, if you think that you're getting into software engineering and you won't have to interact with people, that is false. So we'll talk about that in another video. But that's the first example of freelancing, and that will allow you to get some experience under your belt. It looks amazing on resumes that you work on projects outside of school, because I'm going to talk about an interview, or I think I talked about interviews in a previous video, but long story short, whenever you go to an interview, most of the time they're not going to look at your education, because everybody coming through that interview room already has a bachelor's of science in computer science and has taken most of the courses that you've taken. So the thing that's going to differentiate you is your project history. And then if it takes off and you start to build a reputation, then that's great. You can incorporate your business. You can start your little coding business, LLC or C Corp, and then start to build it out and start taking bigger contracts. You may hire your buddy or something like that. So it could evolve into like a small little side hustle or become your main gig. So it's never a bad idea to step out and maybe do a little bit of freelancing if you're getting used to the idea of maybe pursuing computer science or software engineering as a profession. The second example of freelancing or contracting is when you are in the middle of your career and you have some experience and you are now wanting to have more creative control or get paid more for what you do, and then you make the decision to go be a contractor. And realize that everything I'm about to say is just kind of my anecdotal evidence, stuff that I've seen in the industry. I haven't worked extensively at bigger corporations. I actually have never had a professional gig working for another company. I started my own software company in college, and now I'm working on that. So, but I have had a little bit of a purview into how these things work, because there was a time when I was interviewing for different companies and I got to kind of put my ear to the rail, as they say, and see what the industry was all about. So when it comes to contracting, when you're in the middle of your career and you've got 5 to 10 years of experience, first and foremost, definitely start by incorporating yourself. So get with an attorney, somebody you trust, and have them incorporate you as an LLC or a type C Corp or whatever they recommend. Again, I'm not an attorney. But what this will do is it will allow you to have a corporate entity that protects you and your assets most of the time. If you egregiously break something, then the legal shield of a corporation doesn't always work, because they can seize your personal assets as collateral for the company, but those cases are few and far between. But ideally that's not going to happen, so you shouldn't worry about it. But having the legal shield of a corporate entity is important. Secondly, most companies are going to want to bill to a company or an LLC. They're not going to bill to you as an individual, because it doesn't look the best on the books and it can look kind of shady. And for a public company, a publicly traded company, every last line of their books is under scrupulosity or under examination by their auditors and their investors. So they have to keep everything squeaky clean most of the time. So they're going to want to see that you have a corporation or something that they can bill to, corporation to corporation, so that it looks clean and everything like that. And thirdly, it just looks really cool. It's fun owning your own business, and you can take advantage of a lot of different services. Like there's 4 business services, like at your local stuff. So like if you go to the post office, they usually have business programs or that sort of stuff. So having an EIN number or a corporate ID number opens some doors for you in the professional sphere as well. And you get to be your own boss, which is cool. So with that in mind, you'll definitely want to incorporate, and you'll definitely want to establish yourself with an attorney that you trust, because it's going to come down the line that you're going to be getting MSAs, so master sales agreements, and SLAs, and all these different contracts that are written in this very archaic legalese that's meant to protect the company, because again, the company is going to try and squeeze you for every dollar that they can because you're a contractor. And so having an attorney or a team of attorneys that can read through those contracts and really dissect it for you and say, hey, this is fair or this is unfair, and work on your behalf, that's going to help you from getting screwed a lot of the time. So with that in mind, have an attorney, have them go through the contract, have them redline it. Don't be afraid to negotiate and go back and forth on billing or responsibilities and things like that, because companies do this all the time. If a company is hiring a contractor, chances are it's not their first time doing it. So whoever you're interfacing with or whoever you're working with, they're gonna be used to it. And then also, if you are getting into contracting and you are leaving the cradle or the safety net of a W-2 job, realize that you're probably going to have to do a lot of networking, because obviously the company that you leave is probably going to be your first contract, because you'll spin out and then you'll know all the people in that company, you'll know who to talk to, and that'll land you your first contract. But no company works on a flamingo structure. You never have just one client. That's bad policy, because if that client goes belly up tomorrow, you go belly up too. So definitely get in the loop, start networking, going to user groups, and get plugged into your local community of fellow software engineers, fellow infrastructure engineers, whatever you're contracting in. Go and talk to people and see where the industry is. See who's contracting with who's talking to who the movers and shakers are, because that contract is going to dry up. That first contract that you get is going to dry up in 18 months or so, or however long it is. And you can't bank on that company always giving you work, because they may downsize or they may choose to just not work with contractors anymore. Mechanics, we don't work with contractors. I want to keep all of my developers on W-2 payroll, and we don't have any right now, but these are just decisions that I'm making in the initial stage, because I want that level of locality, and I want everybody that works for us to have that cultural bond and be part of the team. So there are some companies that are culturally adverse to hiring a contractor. And so with that in mind, you have to know who the movers and shakers are. Like I said, what companies are contracting, what companies aren't, so that you're not having to do a bunch of cold calls or knocking down doors that are going to get you nowhere. So go talk to your local user groups, talk to other contractors, see who they're talking to, see if there's work, and start making friends. Like, don't go into it as a transaction, just start to get to know your fellow contractors. And before you know it, because they're working in and out with these companies, and if they know that you're an infra engineer or a software engineer or a security engineer, and they're working on a project in another vertical, but then they hear rumblings of, oh, I need a security engineer, or we're going to contract this to somebody. Do you know anybody? Your name should be the first one that pops up into that contractor's head. So look out for each other, do the same courtesy to other people, but you got to be on the ball, because contractors, you do have a lot more earning potential, but you have got to hustle for that extra guac. And so doing all these things, establishing a corporation, having an attorney on retainer to read through your contracts, networking, all of those things are going to help you succeed as a professional contractor when you spin out from your safety net of the W-2 job or the regular job and then go work in your own gig doing contract work. So it's a lot of fun. You don't really work on projects more than a couple months to a couple years, depending on how long the engagement is. So things are always fresh. That's nice. But you do have to be on the ball. You have to continue to learn, and you have to keep up with the industry, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other contractors and staffers out there. They're going to be competing with you. So you've got to be on your game. And yeah, those are my recommendations. Those are just some of my thoughts about freelancing. Oh, Michael T. Michael, I hope that answers your question. Like I said, there's 2 ways you can go to it. If you're just starting out or if you're in the middle of your career, definitely give it a shot. Freelancing is a lot of fun, getting to wake up every morning and work for yourself and work on projects that you yourself kind of handpicked. That's a big plus. So that is all for today's video, and I will send you over to post video Andrew to take us out.